Hello everyone, thank you for being here. We're going to start today's lesson with a quick reflection and a gut check. As you know, we're here to learn about developmental psychology and how people grow and change and the different theories and perspectives through which you might view that. So before we talk about this next theory, I want you to think about yourself. Think about who you are, the way that you think, the way that you behave, and what do you think made you this way? How did you become you? So take a moment to reflect on that. And then when you have some ideas, connect with the link and enter a few short 1 or 2 word phrases that really sum it up for you. This will create a word map for us, and after about a minute, we'll check in and see what we're thinking. All right, so let's stop here and see where we are coming from as a group. Looks like a mix of some social influences. I see parents, relationships, school. I see some important events, and biological influences, genetics, illness. I see brain chemistry. So yeah, this might remind you of the nature versus nurture debate in psychology, and maybe helps clarify where you stand on that issue. Of course, there's never any easy black and whites, but as a group, it looks like we've identified factors that represent both sides, nature and nurture. So great, thank you for doing that. I wanted you to check in with yourself like that because as we learn about these different theories, I'd like for you to really play with them in your mind and see how they match up with your thoughts and understandings of yourself or your children or the people around you. See if you can apply the theories to what your experiences, your observations, your memories are, and how do they fit? Maybe they explain some things, but not everything. So it's just a reminder to engage with these ideas as we seek to understand ourselves and human beings in general. So with that said, today's lecture is on Erikson's psychosocial theory of development. And the goals for this lesson is for you to really understand this perspective. I want you to understand the context in which it was developed, what was going on in the psychological world when it was created. Become familiar with the 8 stages of development that we'll go over and how there's this moving through crises throughout your life. I'd like you to become aware of the critiques of the theory as well and maybe how you feel it works or it doesn't work. And so to do this, I ask you to learn through active listening. I'll have you match the age with the stage, and you'll also have an opportunity to discuss with your peers some ways to apply this theory to your life and your work. So let's start with some context. Who is this guy? Well, Erikson was born in 1902 and lived until the age of 91. He was born in Germany and later immigrated to the United States, where his career really took off. Erikson had a vast array of interests. He was an artist, a psychologist, a professor, an anthropologist, and his rise to fame came with the publication of his book, Childhood and Society, in which he laid out the details of his psychosocial theory of development. Well, Erikson never had a formal degree, but he studied psychoanalysis under Sigmund and Anna Freud in Vienna. So with this certification, he became the first psychoanalyst in the United States. And it was because of that that he easily jumped into academia, and he had positions at Harvard and Yale and Berkeley. He also had his own psychoanalysis practice. Erikson was passionate about his work and his direct observations of children and adults. He wrote detailed psychobiographies about well-known people, including a Nobel Prize-winning book about Gandhi. He was also very interested in cross-cultural comparisons. He spent time on a Native American reservation with the Sioux. He studied war veterans and was just really interested in marginalized groups and different cultures within society. Throughout his life, Erikson was also fascinated by identity. His sense of self was something that he struggled with as a child and then again later as an immigrant. And the more he looked to understand himself and the more that he looked to others and others whose experiences would otherwise be very different from his, he saw identity and how one fits into society as a defining issue of all human development. And well, this wasn't completely explained by Freud's theory that was prevalent and that Erikson himself studied. So Erikson, along with his wife Joan, began expanding on this theory of development based on his work and studies and insight. So, in this theory, Erikson describes how the biological and psychological are undeniably intertwined with social influences during development. And there's an interplay between our individual needs and the demands and expectations of the environment and the society that one is born into. He describes a universal series of stages from infancy to adulthood that everyone goes through. And these stages are marked by specific psychosocial crises or conflicts that must be resolved with either a positive or negative outcome. And he describes the stages as moving along according to the epigenetic principle, which means that these conflicts and virtues that arise are always with you, but certain ones are most relevant and more obvious at different times of your life. Resolution of one stage affects the next and is affected by the one before it, and there's sort of an unfolding of your personality. And at the center of all of this is the quest for and transformation of identity and finding that healthy balance and acceptance of who you are and the society that you are in. So I just want to highlight some of the differences between Erikson's psychosocial theory and Freud's psychosexual theory that came before it. They are both stage theories, but Erikson's really does emphasize the role of social influence on development, whereas Freud's theory is more driven by biological needs and sexual maturation. The other big change is that Erikson is the first to describe development as something that happens throughout the entire lifespan. Before that, with Freud and other theorists, development was described as something that sort of only happened in childhood and then you're done. So with this lifespan view, this is something that still impacts psychology today, and we're still talking about development throughout the lifespan. The other difference with Erikson is that he got a lot of his information and his insights from direct observation of children and adults. Freud used a psychoanalytic setting where he would talk to adults about their childhood, but we still use this direct observation of children and adults in a more natural setting as a way to research psychology today. Let's take a look at the stages in Erikson's theory. He defines 8 stages throughout the lifespan. The timeline of the stages corresponds with physical maturation, so they are generally defined by certain ages. Each stage in Erikson's theory builds on the preceding stages and paves the way for the next stages of development. Erikson believed that in each stage, people experience a crisis that affects and transforms their personality development. These crises involve some conflict between the psychological needs of the individual and the needs of the society. And as we age, the social influences expand and they change. So while an infant would only be influenced by the interactions with his mother or caregiver, an elementary school student is influenced by caregivers and peers and teachers and so on. So as the social influences change and the physical capabilities change, different conflicts will rise to importance. So you can see in each stage the conflict that takes precedence. There is the conflict of trust versus mistrust in infancy, autonomy versus doubt in toddlerhood. If you look above and below on this image, you'll see. And if people successfully deal with the conflict that they emerge from this stage with psychological strengths or virtues that will stay with them and serve them for the rest of their lives. But if things don't go so well, they would not develop these strengths during that important time, and it may negatively impact not only the resolution of that stage, but the future stages. And so healthy development represents a balance between these two extremes in each stage, the one on the picture above and below. It's not all or nothing. So for instance, a little bit of mistrust is normal and healthy and can serve a person well as they might think critically about a situation or discern honest from dishonest people. So really a successfully developing person would have favorable ratios of these positive and negative qualities, with more on the positive side. So next up, there's a short video that describes each stage. Let's take a look.
Erikson's theory of psychosocial development identifies 8 stages which a healthy individual should pass through from birth to death. At each stage, we encounter different needs, ask new questions, and meet people who influence our behavior and learning. Stage 1. Basic trust versus mistrust. As infants, we ask ourselves if we can trust the world, and we wonder if it's safe. We learn that if we can trust someone now, we can also trust others in the future. If we experience fear, we develop doubt and mistrust. The key to our development is our mother. Stage 2. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. In our early childhood, we experience ourselves and discover our body. We ask, is it okay to be me? If we are allowed to discover ourselves, then we develop self-confidence. If we are not, we can develop shame and self-doubt. Both parents now play a major role. Stage 3. Initiative versus guilt. In preschool, we take initiative, try out new things, and learn basic principles like how round things roll. We ask, is it okay for me to do what I do? If we are encouraged, we can follow our interests. If we are held back or told that what we do is silly, we can develop guilt. We are now learning from the entire family. Stage 4. Industry versus inferiority. Now we discover our own interests and realize that we are different from others. We want to show that we can do things right. We ask if we can make it in this world. If we receive recognition from our teachers or peers, we become industrious, which is another word for hard-working. If we get too much negative feedback, we start to feel inferior and lose motivation. Our neighbors and schools now influence us the most. Stage 5. Identity versus role confusion. During adolescence, we learn that we have different social roles. We are friends, students, children, and citizens. Many experience an identity crisis. If our parents now allow us to go out and explore, we can find identity. If they push us to conform to their views, we can face role confusion and feel lost. Key to our learning are our peers and role models. Stage 6. Intimacy versus isolation. As young adults, we slowly understand who we are, and we start to let go of the relationships we had built earlier in order to fit in. We ask ourselves if we can love. If we can make a long-term commitment, we are confident and happy. If we cannot form intimate relationships, we might end up feeling isolated and lonely. Our friends and partners are now central to our development. Stage 7. Generativity versus stagnation. When we reach our 40s, we become comfortable, use our leisure time creatively, and maybe begin contributing to society. Our concern is generativity. If we think that we are able to lead the next generation into this world, we are happy. If we did not resolve some conflicts earlier, we can become pessimistic and experience stagnation. People at home and at work are now who influences the most. Stage 8. Ego integrity versus despair. As we grow older, we tend to slow down and begin to look back over our lives. We ask, how have I done? If we think we did well, we develop feelings of contentment and integrity. If not, we can experience despair and become grumpy and bitter. Time to compare us with mankind.
All right, I hope that was helpful, and the illustrations were kind of cool too. Now, I'd like to take a moment to check for understanding and help you kind of align these stages in your mind. So click on the link to connect, and we are going to match the age with the stage. You'll see the ages listed in order on the left-hand side, and your task is to find the corresponding stage on the right-hand side. I'll give you a little bit of time to do this, and then we'll take a look at our answers. All right, let's see how we did. Okay, pretty good. It looks like we're in agreement, maybe a little bit of confusion between toddlerhood and preschool, but let's take a look at our correct answers. We'll go down the list. In infancy, the stage is trust versus mistrust. Toddlerhood, we should have autonomy versus shame and doubt. Preschool, we have initiative versus guilt. Elementary school, industry versus inferiority. Adolescence, identity versus role confusion. Young adulthood is intimacy versus isolation. Middle adulthood is generativity versus stagnation. And then we have maturity, where the conflict is ego integrity versus despair. All right, great job, everybody. for this next part, I'd like you to practice applying this theory to your work and your life. So you're just now becoming familiar with these stages, so I'd like you to focus in on one and pick an age group. So maybe this age group represents your children, your students, maybe your future students, maybe it represents yourself. Think about the major conflict that must be resolved at this stage. How can you support a person's development so that there is a favorable resolution and a positive outcome? What can you do? What can you say? What activities might you prepare? So here's some examples. A preschool teacher works with children in the initiative versus guilt stage. So he knows that they are trying to feel capable and have a sense of control over their environment. So he gives his students opportunities for choice and experimentation whenever he can, and avoids ridiculing their curiosity or their imaginations. Another example, there's a second grade teacher who breaks down complicated tasks so that students can experience small wins along the way, because she knows her students are in the stage of industry versus inferiority, and they're really looking to find what they're good at, and they're starting to compare themselves to others. So those small victories are huge for them. Another example, for adolescents who are going through their identity versus role confusion conflict. A high school advisor seeks to keep communication lines open by hosting supportive discussions about topics such as gender and society. He knows his students are really looking for themselves and who they are and how they fit in society. So I'd like you to take a moment to think about that. Then you'll pair up with a classmate and share your ideas, and feel free to expand on each other's ideas, bounce back and forth, and get the most out of your mini discussions. And I'll give you a little bit of time to work, and then I'll call you back in. All right, let's have everyone come back to the lecture. Thank you for doing that, everyone. I hope that was meaningful for you and you were able to find some good ideas. And I hope that it was kind of a jumping off point for you as you become more familiar with these stages and the conflicts and the resolutions of them. So, thank you. Of course, let's look now to some of the critiques of Erikson's theory. It has proven to be difficult to test objectively. It's not falsifiable. So Erikson himself relied on lengthy observation to study and develop the theory, which is not always practical for research purposes. It can't be reproduced, and it's left up to some interpretation. There's also no explanation for how to resolve the crises that Erikson describes. There's no mechanism described, but just an assertion that the crisis will be resolved either positively or negatively. But how? Some have also said that the theory may be androcentric and pertain more to males over females. But nevertheless, this theory remains relevant and influential even today. So current researchers have even expanded on Erikson's ideas and added new stages to the timeline, for instance, such as emerging adulthood, which comes between adolescence and young adulthood. So it's still really impactful on psychology research. And what about you? Does this theory fit your experiences and observations? Does it help you to make sense of anything? As you digest the information, start making note of its strengths and its weaknesses. So, in sum, I want to highlight some of the key features of Erikson's psychosocial theory of development. It has a basis in and many similarities with Freud's psychoanalytic theory, but it emphasizes social influence on a person's development. It's also the first theory to describe development as something that happens throughout a person's entire life. It's a theory that focuses on the transformation and quest for identity by moving through a series of stages with psychosocial crises and resolutions, either positive or negative. And that is it for today. Before you go, I invite you to take a moment to write down some of the key takeaways from the lecture in your own voice, in your words. Also, please check out the references listed if you would like any more information on Erikson's psychosocial theory. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.